I'll be on Hannity tonight, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So the immunity case went to the Supreme Court. Why is there an immunity case at all? Why? This issue hasn't been litigated as to criminal liability and immunity until today. Since the beginning of this republic, since we've had a president, no charge has ever been brought against an ex-president. Ever. Let alone a sitting president. Since this is the first time this issue has arisen. Why? Why is it the first time this case has arisen? You see, I watched the debates and the discussion among the justices. I found it very compelling. If I were in a political science class or a philosophy class, but not in a constitutional class, because there really wasn't anything said that had any constitutional strength behind it. Nothing. The Constitution says nothing about immunity. I thought it kind of precious when Kagan and Sotomayor mentioned there's no immunity in the Constitution, let alone for after an individual serves as president. Well, there's no abortion clause in the Constitution. I reminded them that, too. That they don't seem to care about that. In fact, judicial review is not in the Constitution. It's an implied power. Let me explain what I'm talking about. Up until Joe Biden became president, up until Merrick Garland became Attorney General, up until Jack Smith became an unconstitutionally appointed special counsel, never had to present his resume to the Senate, never was voted on by the Senate, and yet he has these enormous prosecutorial powers. Up until these three stooges came on the public scene, the idea of indicting a former president really was preposterous. None of the Justice Department memos from the Office of Legal Counsel address this. Despite all the references to other cases involving civil immunity, none of the Supreme Court decisions directly address this. Excuse me. The reason why this case is a case of first impression after almost 250 years of raucous elections, of brutal elections, of crooked elections, is because the Biden administration has decided, with its prosecutor, to burn down all notions of comity, C-O-M-I-T-Y, tradition, and honored processes. Now, what am I talking about? Ladies and gentlemen, we've talked here before, a couple of times before, about the election of 1876, Tilden and Hayes. And just to summarize, extraordinarily close election. Tilden actually won the popular vote. 3 Republican states, very, very close. But the Republicans controlled the decision-making process in those states. And they threw out a lot of votes until they could say that they were going to throw their electoral votes to Hayes. That's what they did. Then we had a case, 1876, Oregon. All of a sudden, one of the electors was the Postmaster General. Problem is, the Constitution says no elector can hold any federal office. So he was thrown off. And then Oregon was thrown into chaos. So what happened in these states? You know what they did? The 3 Republican states? They sent in a separate set of electors. Now, today, the court calls them fake electors. Because the prosecutor calls them fake electors. Because the media call them fake electors. There's nothing fake about them. It was a close election. An election is not decided until Congress decides the election. The news media don't decide the election. States don't even decide the election. Obviously, they participate. But under the Electoral College, both houses of Congress meet. And they either sanctify the vote or they don't. Challenges are made. Challenges were made in 2000, 2004, 2016 against Republicans who, quote unquote, won. Those challenges failed. Those challenges were made by the likes of Marxist Jamie Raskin, Sheila Jackson Lee, Waters. They failed. The Electoral College vote is not over until Congress says it's over. Not some bureau or unit within a television channel. And so these battles go on. And so a second slate of electors from 3 different states were sent to Congress via the archivist. Were they trying to overthrow an election? Were they trying to obstruct the victor in the election? No, it's part of the process. It's always been part of the process. And yet this is one of the arguments that Jack Smith has made in federal court. This is one of the arguments that they make in their brief to the Supreme Court about fake electors and Donald Trump's role. And that's not part of his presidential duties. Oh, and the fact that Donald Trump's lawyer, John Eastman, tried to convince Mike Pence that he had the authority to take certain actions that he wouldn't take. That came up in 1876, too, by the way, where the argument was that the vice president, then the president of the Senate, and the manager of the Electoral College vote had the power to accept or not certain electoral votes. Then the vice president decided that he did have the power, but that he wouldn't exercise it because of the hostility that would come with it. John Eastman has been disbarred in California as a result of giving what is that opinion. But it's not a crime to give an opinion, and it's not a crime to give that opinion, and that's not an insurrection, and that's not obstruction or anything of the kind. It's an opinion. Because the Constitution is silent on the point. What I'm saying is that the Biden administration, the Department of Justice, Jack Smith, and the Democrats in Arizona and Georgia, they've criminalized the election process. What used to be acceptable practice, alternative slates, a candidate calling a Speaker of the House in a particular legislature in a particular state, all these things were part of a rough and tumble electoral process. They're not crimes. You can throw around the word obstruction or insurrection or interference, but elections are challenged at every stage, from the voting stage to the counting stage, in court, the legal stage. Whether fraud has or has not been committed, they're challenged at every step by Democrats and Republicans throughout American history. Throughout American history. Some of the most, aggressive elections were held early in our history, between Jefferson and Hamilton, as an example. Between Adams and Hamilton, and Adams and Jefferson. Brutal. There was constant give and take Constant promises. That's our history. But it's all been criminalized now. If I were to ask you, what is legal and what is illegal today in terms of election processes, you couldn't tell me. You couldn't tell me. Can a lawyer give legal advice? Apparently not. But what if that advice challenges what's taking place or urges the vice president to take a different action? No, they'll be disbarred. Why? Why? When you understand the electoral process ends with Congress and not anybody else, this is why people fight to the bitter end. And the Democrats have done it all the time. All the time. So let's swing back to the Supreme Court today. We have Justice Coney Barrett, who is very obsessed with what's private and what's official. She turns to the prosecutor's brief and says to counsel for President Trump, well, it says here this is private. Do you agree? Yes, that's private. Well, she's caught into the weeds of the Jack Smith model, which is the criminalization of the electoral process. Why does it matter if it's official or private? He's the president of the United States. He's running for re-election. They do these things. Al Gore was vice president of the United States running for president. He didn't just roll over and accept the election results. He litigated in one county after another after another. His lawyers weren't brought up on ethics charges or criminal charges. He wasn't accused of obstructing the outcome in Florida, trying to change the outcome with litigation. Not by any prosecutor. It wasn't criminalized, the 2000 election. Gore's lawyers didn't face ethics complaints, didn't lose their law licenses. Despite the litigation going on and on and on, one county after another, as Gore tried to, quote unquote, overturn the results. Remember? It's not obstruction. And so the issue before the court really has been posed as what's official and what's not. And I posted that. That's what they're going to debate, and obviously that's what they debated. But that's not the real issue. Not a single justice, in my humble opinion, understood what the real issue is and was. They've criminalized the political and electoral process. That's why there's now a struggle over what's official and what's not. They have embraced Jack Smith and the Department of Justice's criminalization of our campaign system. It's not a crime to send a separate slate of electors. You're not imposing it on anybody. Congress has the final say. It's not a crime to pick up the phone and call politicians, whether they be legislators or congressmen and so forth, ask them what they can do, legally, of course. It's not a crime. Democrats do it all the time. It's not a crime, as alleged by Jack Smith, to claim that the election was thrown and to encourage people to challenge it and to speak out against it. We used to call that the First Amendment. And look at the charges that Jack Smith has brought. 1871 Ku Klux Klan Act. What does that have to do with anything? Nothing. The Enron Obstruction Act. What does that have to do with anything? Nothing. In fact, the court's considering that issue now as a result of Mr. Smith. And the federal contractors, the statute that's used to charge them when they're crooked, what does that have to do with January 6th? Nothing. So this case against Trump is the perfect illustration of why a president needs immunity even after office. But more than that, it's the perfect illustration of a prosecutor gone rogue, twisting the law and criminalizing elections. That's why the court is confounded, because they don't understand what the issue was.